All right, our next storyteller, I've actually known for some time because we were in the same program at Oxford University, but at different times because I am very old. But nonetheless, we did overlap just a little bit. So he started his training as a clinical psychologist, then got a PhD in neuroscience from the University of Oxford because he's fancy, and he's now a postdoctoral research fellow at the Icahn School of Medicine at Mount Sinai. He's also really actively involved in public outreach and programs aimed at increasing diversity and inclusion. Please welcome to the stage, Davide Folloni! Woo, woo!
Sounds good. In that moment, I regretted wearing that additional piece of clothes just to look more professional. Where was I? It was 10 years ago, and I was being interviewed for a PhD, well, for a prestigious scholarship, actually, at the University of Oxford. Now, that was an amazing opportunity because I could had the chance to do the research I loved, follow a dream, and most of all, make my parents proud, being the first member in my family to go to college. Only issue, in that exact moment, I froze. I was feeling very anxious. I was very stressed. My heartbeat were out of any track. I was like sweating, and I thought that actually I blew my chances. I was sure I blew my chances. I looked around the room, white walls, but you couldn't see them because it was a dark room. Silence. And in front of me, 14 professors, all staring at you. Well, staring at me. But you know the feeling. And the issue is that they were nodding their head. They were commenting to one another what I just did. And I felt terrible for what I just did. Now, to figure out what is going on here, I need to tell you two things. First, I make questionable choices. Second, when I'm stressed, I use humor, sometimes without luck. But to really understand, we need to go back another year when I was completing my training as clinical psychologist. Everything was going according to plan. Everything was great. I was about to work in my hospital 1 year later. And at that point, I made the first questionable choice. You know what? I'm going to Denmark, and I'll do neuroscience research. I'm not doing clinical work anymore. Right. The reason I did that is because I always loved understanding people, understanding why we do what we do, why I'm on this stage tonight, why you live in New York and you pay rent, you have to pay, and why our brain allows us to do that. So I thought neuroscience was a good field, and that's why I went there. The only issue is that when I got to Denmark and I went to IKEA, I couldn't order a pillow because my English was that bad. I eventually got a pillow, but it was a couch pillow. That's all right. Anyway, I spent 1 year there, wrote my thesis, and funnily enough, 1 year later, I got invited for this interview in Oxford. Now, if we go back to that moment when I was feeling that everything was lost, I need to tell you something. Let's go back a few more seconds. I'm about to start that interview. I walk in the room, I confidently take the remote, I present the first slide of my presentation, and usually the first slide is pretty boring. It's just a bunch of literature of what other people have done. But what really matters is the second slide. Because in the second slide, you're going to convince the audience, you're going to convince the committee why they should pick you. So the second slide is what allows you to shine and to get your position. So I clicked on the remote. I looked at the second slide popping up. I turned my head towards the committee, and they were in disbelief. Now, what was on that slide? What did I think it was a great idea to get a position at Oxford? I put a comic. I put a cartoon. There was a comic strip there. And because my research was about molecules and oxytocin, there were two people there. One of them expresses their love, because oxytocin is believed to support love and social behavior and friendship. And the other person, very pragmatically, describing the physiological release of oxytocin just to express their symptoms. The symptoms. Well, at the time, I believe love was symptoms, but too. So, but we can talk another night about it. Anyway, to express their feelings. And yeah, you may think that's not the best way to get a PhD. I think the committee thought the same, and in that moment I realized it. So I started panicking, I started freezing, and what did I do to get out of that situation? Yeah, that's right, I made a second joke. I looked at them, I made a second joke, they looked at me, shake their hand. And, you know, at that point you start searching someone, you know, that is like, or at least smiling. Nobody was smiling. I looked on the right of the room, professor in cognitive psychology. I really liked that professor. He was, nope, nodding the hand. I looked on the left. There was another professor that was interviewing me, professor in pharmacology. What are you even doing there in pharmacology? I'm a clinical psychologist. Why are you there? Clearly you have no sense of humor, but that's fine. I couldn't discuss about the sense of humor over there. It was British humor. And anyway, I carried on with my presentation. I'm not saying that the Italian humor is better, but I carried on with my presentation anyway. Presented the remaining slides. I got a few questions. I answered. And then as I left the room, they looked at me and smiled. And I was like, you should have smiled 5 minutes ago. Now it doesn't help. Anyway, I got out of the room, and these two fancy kids, candidates for the interview coming up immediately after me, came to me and was like, oh, how did it go? Yeah, my face was not impressed, and my Italian accent was not exceptionally good at explaining it compared to their perfect British accent. So I went home that night. I was like, you know, that was a second questionable choice. Maybe the cartoon didn't help. The following day, I open my inbox. I see an email from the program coordinator. I open it. I start reading it. And you hope to get the bad news immediately. No, I start reading it. Hi, thank you for showing up yesterday. No mentioning about the jokes I made. I go down 5 lines, no response of how the PhD went, the PhD interview. 8th line, 10th line. Why do they always make those emails so long? It wouldn't be like painless if you say pass, not pass, yeah, welcome, see you, we'll give you the money, no, go back. So I keep reading, I go down, and as I approach the last line of the email, it says, we would like to extend you an offer for a PhD at the University of Oxford. Yeah, my reaction was closing the email page, reopening, reloading it, and rereading it. If that wasn't enough, I did it a third time, and I started calling people just to confirm that actually they could see the same. You know, I've been in clinical psychology. Delusion may be an option. I mean, a couple of them confirmed, so I went out of the house. I went to the pub in front of my place. I sat with that guy that was always sitting in the corner, drinks his own pints. David, actually. Turns out he was very similar to me with name. And I spoke with him. He kept drinking his own pints. And the following day, I went at work, and I asked again my supervisor to control, and that wasn't enough, and that was true. Now, that was a surprise for me. I don't know if my jokes helped getting the PhD, but a few years later, someone that was in the committee that day told me that apparently one reason they picked me was because of the passion in what I was presenting, because the way I communicated it, and because the way I managed the stress in that situation. So, years later, I don't know if the jokes helps. I keep making jokes. People keep not laughing at them. But I decided that even though in certain contexts we are required to look professional, I will keep making jokes, and I will keep being true to myself and will not allow the context to change who I am, but I will be myself in science and try to contribute to it that way. Thank you.